The entire story of America's most historic riverside mansion, Rivervale Estate. There's a place where the Hudson River bends like a secret being whispered through time, a place where marble floors still echo with the footsteps of presidents, and the walls remember conversations that shaped a nation. Rivervale Estate. For over a century, it stood as America's cathedral of power, where fortunes were made over brandy and wars were discussed in parlors lined with gold. But beneath the grandeur lay something darker, a family civil war so vicious it turned brother against sister, fortune against blood, and legacy into ruin. This is the story of the most powerful house you've never heard of, and the inheritance battle that nearly destroyed American high society. Subscribe to Empire Manners for more deep dive documentaries. The year is 1863. The nation bleeds through civil war, brother fighting brother on distant battlefields. But along the Hudson River, another kind of war is brewing. One fought not with rifles, but with ledgers, lawyers, and letters sealed in wax. At the center stands Rivervale Estate, a mansion so grand it makes neighboring estates look like cottages. 42 rooms, 16 fireplaces, gardens that stretch for 11 acres down to the water's edge. And at its heart, an aging patriarch named Augustus van Rensselaer III, who built an empire on steel, railroads, and ruthless ambition. He's dying, and his children are circling like wolves. Augustus didn't inherit his fortune. He carved it from raw American wilderness with the kind of violence that built this country. Born in 1804 to a modest Dutch merchant family in Albany, he watched his father lose everything in the Panic of 1819. Young Augustus swore he'd never be poor again. By 23, he owned 3 foundries. By 30, he'd secured contracts to supply rails for the Erie Canal expansion. By 40, he was one of the 12 wealthiest men in New York State, and he wanted the world to know it. In 1847, Augustus purchased 237 acres of prime Hudson riverfront property. The locals thought him mad. The land was rocky, prone to flooding, inaccessible. But Augustus saw what they couldn't, a canvas for immortality. He hired James Renwick Jr., the architect who would later design St. Patrick's Cathedral, and gave him an impossible mandate. Build me a house that presidents will visit. Build me a legacy in stone. Renwick delivered. Construction took 6 years and cost what today would equal $48 million. Rivervale Estate rose like a vision from the Hudson, a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture mixed with Italianate grandeur. Local newspapers called it the American Versailles. The main house featured Vermont marble shipped down the Champlain Canal, mahogany from Honduras, crystal chandeliers from Bohemia, and a grand staircase that required 14 master craftsmen 2 years to complete. The ballroom could hold 300 guests. The library contained over 6,000 volumes, including a first edition of the Federalist Papers that Augustus purchased at auction for an astronomical sum. He didn't read it. He just wanted to own it. The estate employed 47 full-time staff, groundskeepers, housemaids, cooks, stable hands, a private secretary, and a man whose sole job was to wind and maintain the 17 clocks scattered throughout the house. This wasn't a home, it was a statement. But Augustus's greatest architectural achievement wasn't the house itself, it was the river pavilion. Built on a stone platform extending 30 feet into the Hudson, this octagonal structure served as Augustus's personal throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of the valley. It's here that he conducted his most sensitive business, here that he hosted Martin Van Buren, Millard Fillmore, and in 1860, a rail-thin lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, who was campaigning for the presidency. They talked for 3 hours. No record exists of their conversation, but 2 weeks later, Augustus donated $50,000 to the Republican Party. Lincoln won New York State by a margin that many historians consider decisive. Some whispered that Rivervale bought a presidency. Augustus married twice. His first wife, Catherine Livingston, came from old New York aristocracy. The marriage was strategic, merging Augustus's new money with Catherine's ancient bloodline. She gave him 3 children before dying of tuberculosis in 1849. His second wife, Margaretta Schuyler, 23 years his junior, provided 2 more children and the social connections Augustus craved. Margaretta transformed Rivervale into the epicenter of Hudson Valley society. Her summer galas were legendary. Her winter salons attracted writers, artists, politicians, and industrialists. To be invited to Rivervale was to be anointed. To be excluded was social death. But inside the family, poison festered. Augustus's 5 children grew up in luxury, but without love. He was a tyrant, controlling every aspect of their lives with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. His eldest son, Augustus Jr., called Junior by everyone, was groomed from birth to inherit the empire. Tutored by the finest instructors, sent to Harvard, then to Europe for 2 years to study finance and culture. But Junior had the great misfortune of being sensitive in an age that demanded hardness. He loved poetry, music, and philosophy. He once told his sister that he'd rather be a professor than a railroad baron. His father never forgave him for that confession. The second son, William, was everything Junior was not: aggressive, cunning, cold. He entered the family steel business at 19 and immediately began modernizing operations with a brutality that shocked even Augustus. He fired workers without cause, slashed wages, crushed a nascent union movement with hired muscle. Profits increased. William earned his father's respect, but not his trust. Augustus saw too much of himself in William. And Augustus knew what men like them were capable of. Then there were the daughters. Eliza, the eldest, married a Boston banker and removed herself from the direct line of inheritance, though she never stopped plotting. Caroline, younger by 2 years, remained unmarried, living at Rivervale as her father's unofficial manager, running the household with quiet efficiency. She was brilliant with numbers, better than her brothers at reading contracts and spotting advantageous investments. In another era, she would have run the empire, but this was 1863. Women didn't inherit fortunes, they married them. And finally, little Theodore, born in 1855, still just a boy when the war began, watching his family circle each other like gladiators. By the spring of 1863, Augustus's health was failing. Decades of rich food, cigars, and stress had destroyed his heart. His personal physician, Dr. Edmund Hartley, kept detailed notes that survive in the New York Historical Society archives. Congestive heart failure, severe edema, labored breathing, intermittent chest pain. Augustus refused to slow down. He conducted business from his bed, signing contracts propped against pillows, dictating letters to his secretary while coughing blood into silk handkerchiefs. He knew the end approached, and he'd made a decision that would detonate his family like a powder keg. The will. Augustus spent 3 months crafting it with his attorney, Silas Crawford, one of Manhattan's most feared legal minds. The document ran to 47 pages, dense with provisions, codicils, and conditions. Augustus summoned his children to Rivervale on April 19, 1863. He didn't show them the will. He simply announced its existence and delivered a speech that his daughter Caroline later recorded in her diary. "You are my blood, but you are not my equals. I built this empire from nothing. None of you have earned it. None of you deserve it. But biology demands I leave it to someone. So I've decided to let you fight for it. May the strongest survive." 6 weeks later, Augustus Van Rensselaer III died in his bedroom overlooking the Hudson. He was 59 years old. The funeral was a spectacle befitting American royalty. Over 2,000 mourners attended. Business titans, senators, governors, even Vice President Hannibal Hamlin came to pay respects. Augustus was interred in a mausoleum he'd commissioned 10 years earlier, a Greek revival structure on a hill overlooking Rivervale, designed to be visible from the river. Even in death, he demanded to be seen. The reading of the will occurred 3 days later, in the library, with all 5 children, Margaretta, and a small army of lawyers present. Silas Crawford broke the seal and began to read. What followed was devastation. Augustus had divided his empire not equally, but strategically, in a way calculated to cause maximum chaos. Junior, the eldest, received Rivervale Estate itself, the house, grounds, and the prestige that came with it, but not the fortune to maintain it. The estate cost over $70,000 a year to operate, equivalent to nearly $2 million today. Junior was given an annual stipend of only $40,000. The shortfall was intentional. Augustus had designed his son to fail. William received the steel foundries, the railroads, and the investment portfolio, the profit engines, with one condition: he must pay Junior's shortfall every year, essentially subsidizing the brother he despised. If William refused, everything would be liquidated and donated to charity. Caroline was bequeathed a trust fund of $200,000, generous by any standard, but a fraction of what her brothers received. The trust came with a provision: she could not touch the principal until she married. If she remained unmarried by age 40, the funds would revert to the estate. Augustus was forcing his daughter into marriage from beyond the grave. Eliza received a smaller trust, $50,000, with no conditions. She'd already married well. Augustus saw no need to reward her further, and little Theodore, still only 8 years old, received nothing. His inheritance would be determined when he turned 25, at which point the executors would reassess the family situation. It was a ticking time bomb, set to explode in 17 years. Margareta, the stepmother, received the New York City townhouse and an annual pension of $15,000. Comfortable, but not extravagant. She would never struggle, but she would never wield power. Augustus's final insult to the woman who'd given him social legitimacy. The room erupted. William stood and accused Junior of somehow manipulating their father. Junior, pale and shaking, insisted he knew nothing. Caroline demanded to know why her business acumen was being ignored. Eliza wept, more from anger than sadness. Margareta sat silent, staring at her hands. And the lawyers, experienced in the ugliness of inheritance, simply waited for the storm to pass. But the storm didn't pass. It intensified. Within a week, William filed suit to contest the will, arguing his father had been mentally incompetent when he signed it. Junior countersued to secure his full inheritance. Caroline hired her own attorney and demanded the trust conditions be nullified as unconstitutional, a long-shot legal argument that went nowhere but cost $30,000 to pursue. The case, officially titled Van Rensselaer versus Van Rensselaer Estate, dragged through New York courts for 3 years. It became a tabloid sensation. Newspapers printed lurid details. Harper's Weekly ran a cartoon showing the Van Rensselaer children as dogs fighting over a bone. Respectable society was scandalized and entertained in equal measure. Meanwhile, Rivervale crumbled. Junior tried desperately to maintain the estate, but the math was impossible. He couldn't afford the staff, the repairs, the grounds maintenance. He fired half the workers, which caused the grounds to deteriorate. He closed off entire wings of the house to save on heating. He sold furniture, paintings, and silver to cover expenses. The chandelier from the ballroom went to a collector in Philadelphia for $9,000. The first edition Federalist Papers sold at auction. Junior was liquidating his inheritance piece by piece just to survive. William watched with satisfaction. He paid not a single dollar of the mandated subsidy, daring Junior to sue him, which Junior couldn't afford to do while fighting the primary will contest. Caroline took a different approach. She left Rivervale, moved to New York City, and did something scandalous. She started working. She became a bookkeeper for a textile company, using an assumed name to avoid social humiliation. She lived in a modest boarding house and saved every penny, determined to build her own fortune since her father's was being kept from her by legal technicalities and gender discrimination. Her diary from this period, preserved at the New York Public Library, is a masterpiece of quiet rage. Every entry drips with resentment toward her father, her brothers, and a society that valued her only as someone's wife. The legal battle reached a climax in 1866. The court ruled in favor of the will's validity. Augustus had been of sound mind. The document would stand as written, but the judge added a crucial modification. Given William's refusal to honor the subsidy clause, the court ordered the steel and railroad assets be placed in a managed trust. William would receive distributions, but he could not have full control until he complied with his father's wishes. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and embittered everyone. William appealed. Junior appealed. The lawyers grew richer. The Van Rensselaers grew poorer and angrier. During this legal chaos, America transformed around them. The Civil War ended. Reconstruction began. The Gilded Age emerged. Fortunes were made overnight in oil, steel, and railroads. Men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt eclipsed the Van Rensselaers in wealth and influence. Rivervale, once a symbol of arrival, became a symbol of a fading era. New money built bigger, flashier mansions. The Hudson Valley filled with estates that made Rivervale look almost quaint. The Van Rensselaers were becoming irrelevant, and they were too busy fighting each other to notice. By 1870, a fragile truce emerged. Exhausted by legal fees and public humiliation, the siblings reached a private settlement. William would receive full control of the business assets, but would pay Junior an annual subsidy of $30,000, less than required, but more than nothing. Junior would retain Rivervale, but would downsize operations dramatically. Caroline received a lump sum of $120,000, less than her trust but available immediately and without marriage conditions. She took the money and invested it brilliantly, eventually becoming one of New York's first female real estate investors, though she did so through male proxies to avoid scandal. Eliza faded from the story, living quietly in Boston, and Theodore, now 15, was sent to boarding school in Switzerland, removed from the family chaos until his inheritance date arrived. Junior lived at Rivervale until 1882. The house, once alive with light and laughter, became a mausoleum. He never married, never had children, never recovered from the psychological damage of his father's manipulation and his family's betrayal. He spent his days reading in the library and taking long walks along the river. Staff who worked there during this period described a gentle, melancholic man who apologized excessively and tipped generously with money he didn't have. He died of pneumonia at age 53. Rivervale passed to William, who by this time had rebuilt the family fortune to respectable levels, but had no interest in the estate itself. William sold Rivervale in 1884 to a banking family from Philadelphia for a fraction of its value. The new owners attempted to restore it to its former glory, but found the costs prohibitive. It changed hands 3 more times over the next 20 years, each owner loving the romance of the place but unable to afford the reality. By 1900, Rivervale was partially abandoned. The River Pavilion where Augustus once hosted presidents collapsed during a storm. The gardens returned to wilderness. Locals reported seeing broken windows, missing roof tiles, and ivy consuming the marble facade. The American Versailles was dying. The 20th century brought new indignities. During the Great Depression, Rivervale was briefly operated as a hotel, a failed venture that lasted less than 2 years. During World War II, it served as a convalescent home for wounded soldiers, who carved their names into the mahogany paneling and left cigarette burns on the library floors. After the war, it sat empty for nearly a decade, vandalized by locals and stripped by salvagers. The grand staircase that took 14 craftsmen 2 years to build was dismantled and sold piece by piece. The Bohemian chandeliers disappeared. The Vermont marble was pried up and repurposed. Rivervale was being cannibalized. Then, in 1957, something unexpected happened. The Hudson Valley Historical Preservation Society, a newly formed nonprofit, purchased Rivervale for $12,000, roughly the price of a new car. They saw what others had missed: historical significance, architectural importance, a story worth saving. Over the next 15 years, they raised funds, applied for grants, and recruited volunteers. Slowly, painfully, Rivervale was stabilized, not restored to its original grandeur that would cost tens of millions, but saved from total collapse. In 1973, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Rivervale became a museum. Today, you can visit Rivervale Estate for $15. You'll walk through rooms where presidents dined and where a family destroyed itself over money. You'll see the library, now mostly empty but still beautiful. You'll stand in the ballroom where 300 guests once danced, now silent except for the echo of your footsteps. You'll visit the grounds, still wild but carefully wild, maintained to suggest grandeur, without requiring the fortune Augustus spent. And if you walk down to the river, you can still see the stone foundation where the pavilion once stood, where the most powerful conversations in America once happened. The tour guides tell Augustus's story. They describe his rise from nothing. They explain the architecture, the history, the famous visitors, but they spend most of their time on the inheritance war, because that's what people remember. Not the mansion itself, but the cautionary tale it represents. About ego and control, about families torn apart by wealth, about a man so determined to test his children that he destroyed them. Augustus wanted to be immortal. He achieved it, but not in the way he imagined. He's remembered not for his empire, but for his cruelty, not for what he built, but for what he demolished. Caroline van Rensselaer, the daughter forced to fight for her own independence, outlived all her siblings. She died in 1928 at age 84, having built a successful real estate portfolio and never having married. She left her entire fortune to women's suffrage organizations and educational funds for girls. Her will contained one sentence about her father: "He taught me that I needed no man's permission to be powerful." It was not meant as a compliment. Theodore, the youngest, eventually received his inheritance at 25 and immediately moved to California, changing his name and severing all ties with the Van Rensselaer legacy. He wanted nothing to do with the family that had devoured itself. Rivervale stands as a monument to American ambition and American failure. It represents the contradiction at the heart of the Gilded Age: the beauty built on brutality, the legacy purchased with cruelty, the houses that were never homes. Hundreds of thousands visit each year, drawn by history and fascinated by tragedy. They take photographs, they buy postcards, they imagine what it must have been like to live in such splendor. But the real story of Rivervale isn't in the marble or the mahogany. It's in the letters Caroline wrote from her boarding house, in the diary entries where Junior described feeling like a prisoner in his own inheritance, in the court documents detailing a family civil war that lasted decades. It's in the human cost of building empires. There's a room on the second floor, small by Rivervale standards, that most tourists walk past. It was Augustus's private study. No grand staircase or crystal chandelier, just a desk, a chair, and a window overlooking the Hudson. It's here that he wrote the will that destroyed his family. The desk is still there, roped off but visible. If you look closely, you can see scratches in the wood where he pressed too hard with his pen. The museum keeps the room dim, preserved exactly as it was. On the wall hangs a single portrait: Augustus at 50, painted 2 years before his death. He stares out from the canvas with eyes that are proud, calculating, and utterly alone. It's the most honest image in the entire house. The final irony of Rivervale is this: Augustus built it to cement his legacy, to prove his importance, to buy immortality. And it worked. People still visit. His name is still spoken, but not with admiration, with warning. Rivervale is what happens when wealth replaces wisdom, when ego conquers empathy, when a father loves his fortune more than his children. The house still stands, beautiful and broken, a perfect metaphor for the family that built it. Power met politics in these halls, and history paid the price. But the real payment was made by 5 children who never asked to be born into such coldness and spent their lives paying for their father's ambition. As the sun sets over the Hudson, Rivervale glows golden in the failing light, looking for a moment like it must have in its glory days. The river flows past, indifferent and eternal, and inside the house, the 17 clocks that once required a full-time attendant stand silent, frozen at different times, stopped decades ago. No one winds them anymore. There's no need. Time already had its say. Rivervale is no longer a home. It's evidence of what we're capable of building and what we're capable of destroying. The grand staircase is gone. The chandeliers are scattered. The fortune has evaporated. But the story remains, carved into every stone, whispered in every empty room, and it asks us, across the centuries, a simple question: what are you building, and what will it cost the people you love? Subscribe to Empire Manners for more documentaries like this.